different do you think your chemistry with Jen is to your chemistry with Kenny?
Hey, friendo, Steve here.
And Larson.
And you're watching Tom Talks Rubbish.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and stand back for another interview. This time, I'm joined by Sondra Ruth from Inside the Ropes, and mainly the Queen Street Posse. So welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm Sondra Ruth. Nice to meet everybody.
So thank you for finally coming on.
I'm glad it worked out.
We've been trying to peel the curtain back. We've been trying to do this for what, 6 months?
Maybe something like that. I can't remember exactly when the first one was scheduled, but it was a while back for sure.
Yeah. But if we take this back to the beginning, before you were Inside the Ropes, where did you first discover wrestling?
I was, how old would I have been? I would have been 25. And I didn't watch it until I was an adult. So it would have been 2010. I think Jack Swagger had just won the world championship. Edge was feuding with an anonymous general manager computer. And I thought this was the dumbest thing in the world. And then I got hooked on it. Like, Edge throwing around the computer is one of my favorite wrestling memories, actually, because it kind of just got me into it. And I was sort of hate watched it at first and then started being like, but I really want to find out what happens. And then when I figured out it was soap operas with gymnastics, I was like, oh, so this is made extremely for me, because I've been a gymnastics fan all my life. I did gymnastics as a kid, and I love a cheesy romance or a cheesy soap opera drama. So it was perfect.
Fair enough. You talked about hate watching it at first.
Yeah.
That strikes me as, did someone encourage you to watch it?
Yeah, my partner at the time was into wrestling in his younger days, and he was the one who kind of introduced me to it, because he'd turn it on every once in a while. He wasn't a regular watcher. It turned out I ended up being the regular watcher throughout the entirety of our relationship. But yeah, it was we lived together, and so it was on every once in a while, and now I'm hooked on it and it's my job. It's
Fair
really strange.
Enough. Yeah, it is a very strange line of work we've all found for ourselves, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So, if you hate watched it at the time, what were some of the things you picked up on that you were like, this is so dumb, but I love it?
When Jack Swagger won the world title, and then he was showing off his Scrabble trophies and all of his childhood accomplishments, and I think Big Show came out and beat him up. And I was like, this guy's still talking. It's been a whole ad break. This is so ridiculous. Why is he just talking to the crowd throughout the whole ad break? I knew nothing about wrestling, keep in mind, nothing. I'd seen maybe a little bit of stuff from The Rock. That a friend in high school was a fan of wrestling, and she would show me stuff with The Rock in it because The Rock was hot. And so we were fans of The Rock.
Fair enough.
But that's basically why she liked him. And so she would tape the Rock segments off of Raw and SmackDown. I don't know what it would have been at that time. It would have been 2000. So yeah, he would have been on both at that point. I'm trying to think, because I do retro with Kenny. We do 20 years ago. So I'm trying to put that together with the childhood stuff that I would have seen. I was watching very carefully in our retro podcast to see if I would recognize any of the segments, but I don't think I did. I remember Triple H being there. So for a while, the only wrestlers before I actually started watching that I could name were Triple H, The Rock, and Al Snow, because Al Snow was in a segment with The Rock, and I just thought that was the dumbest name ever. So Al Snow was a name that I could have gotten to faster than Shawn Michaels or something, which is really bizarre. But yeah, that the Jack Swagger segment sticks out in my mind for sure. When Kane was in a feud with Edge, and Edge was kidnapping Paul Bearer. I loved that stuff. I thought that was super fun. But just all of the drama.
I started watching it at the same time as you, so these segments are all very clear in my brain.
Yeah. That was my early wrestling childhood. And then when I started getting into FCW and NXT Redemption and stuff, that's when I solidified the weird wrestling fan that I am.
Fair enough. So obviously it's now 2021. So you've been watching for about 11 years. Have you had an off period in that time?
No, never. Because I started watching it, and when I get into a thing, right? Like I was a big fan. I was like, hey, I'm super into this wrestling thing. And then it wasn't long after that I started listening to Inside the Ropes, and then later working for Inside the Ropes about 4 years later. So and then now it's been my job and my world for so long that no, I've never actually taken time off. I've taken time off of watching like Raw and SmackDown in the past when I didn't have to, but never away from wrestling. Wrestling's always been there.
What is there is there an era or a part that you're like, okay, maybe I will slow down and stop watching? And then is there something that you look back on now from your time that you're watching and it's like, how was I a fan during this era?
And maybe the beginning, like maybe the first start of it, right? Because like John Cena had just defeated the Nexus at SummerSlam, which I didn't know about until much later. But no, I mean, like 2015 was rough. Like late 2015 on the main roster was really rough because I think I just stopped watching Raw entirely for all of Sheamus's title reign, or like when Roman won it from Sheamus, I think. I'm probably getting that wrong. Don't like crucify me on Twitter. But it was like right around that time that I stopped watching because I just wasn't into it. Like I couldn't be bothered with Raw or SmackDown at that point was the B show. It was still the pre-taped one.
Was it
that was like Raw Light?
Then? Was it basically the Clips show, wasn't it?
Basically, yeah. And so I hadn't really been watching SmackDown a bunch anyway. I stopped watching Raw, but at that point I watched NXT religiously because that was when NXT was like really reaching its peak. And also I was covering NXT for Inside the Ropes. But you know, like I loved NXT. And so I kept watching that. That was never a chore. And I, you know, found myself getting more into independent wrestling as well. So I've never like taken time away from wrestling. It's been more like I'll shift what I watch and when.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, I'll start that one again. I do apologize. So
No
how
worries.
did you join Inside the Ropes?
So I have probably the weirdest Inside the Ropes joining story out of everybody, just because I'm American. Obviously, I don't live in the UK. I actually just listened to the podcast for a long time, and I started listening in 2012. I think it was a Chris Jericho interview. I want to say like December 2012 or something. You can look in the classic archives to figure out when it was, but I think it came across like my wrestling news feeds as I was reading wrestling news that there was a Chris Jericho interview, and I wanted to listen to it. And then I found out that it was a whole like recap of the week in wrestling it was then when Robert Duffin was still doing the podcasting with Kenny. And I started listening to the show, and that was kind of how I would catch up on what was going on in TNA, because I didn't watch TNA, but they would talk about TNA because Robert insisted on talking about TNA. So I listened to the show for a long time, and then they would always solicit live feedback from listeners and stuff. And so I would get involved in like write-in stuff on the Facebook for, you know, interaction and stuff in the early days of the podcast. And I was really into NXT, and they didn't have anybody to cover NXT. They didn't want to watch it because they have too much to do. Like there's too much wrestling in the world. And so they approached me and then a fellow listener called Bob DeGrand to do an NXT show on their VIP service at the time. It was pre-Patreon days. It was the ITR VIP service. And I had never met Bob. He lived in New Jersey. I lived in Michigan at the time. But they were like, hey, you guys are the crazy NXT fans on this board. Why don't you do a show of your own? They knew Bob had done podcasting, so he had experience with that. I had zero. And we got together and we had a great 6 months of podcasting until he unfortunately passed away, and then things kind of shifted. But yeah, like I got into it just basically by contributing to the show via written feedback. They'd never heard my voice. They had no idea what I sounded like. And it ended up working out. And now, you know, they're some of my best friends, and Kenny and I talk almost every day. And I work for a company based in Scotland. It's really strange. Like it's hard to explain to people like what I do for a living, especially here in Oklahoma. They're like, why do you work with people in Scotland? And I'm like, well, it is a long story, but it's a good story, and I'm glad I do.
It's an amazing story. That was the thing that I found quite funny when we were messaging to arrange the time for this. You were like, yeah, I'm familiar with the UK time. It's all good.
Oh yeah. I think in UK time, like I don't, it's weirder to me if people try to use Central, and it's even more confusing because I used to live in Michigan, so it's Eastern time, and now I live on Central, so it becomes the whole thing. I'm like, it's just easier if I do UK time. The time change weeks are rough because then it goes to 4 hour or goes to 5 hours difference here instead of 6. And it just becomes a whole situation.
Fair enough. So moving on to your journey inside the ropes, what is one thing that during your 6 months with Bob that he taught you when it comes to podcasting?
He taught me to actually believe in my opinions and to not hold back on that, because I've always been kind of like, I like the kitschy stuff in wrestling. I like the campy stuff. I get very passionate about it. I've been criticized in the past for not thinking about things analytically when I watch wrestling because I'm a fan. Like,
I hate that, by the way.
You can see,
don't see the point.
It's like the reason we watch it is to be fans, right? Like, I mean, I had this Bayley painting commissioned by a friend because I was like, that's one of my favorite things. Like Bayley's title run, like lead up to her title run in NXT was one of my favorite things. Like I cried like a baby when she won the title, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I love. And so Bob definitely taught me, I mean, beyond how to use a microphone and how to speak into a computer, because he also taught me that. But he taught me to not second guess myself, and that if I stumbled over my words or whatever, it was not the end of the world, that my opinions mattered more than like audio quality sometimes would get wonky and I would freak out about it. And he's like, no, people are listening to hear what you have to say. As long as it's not, like atrocious or garbled, then it'll be fine. And so I think he taught me to have a lot more confidence that I could do this and that I was actually okay at it. It's taken years to feel comfortable just recording live to tape, because like in the earlier days, we edited stuff down a lot more. We don't do that anymore. Like that's way too much work. We do too many shows. But like I think he taught me the confidence and just kind of, I don't know, like being able to examine my own opinions and how to articulate them better. Fair
enough. Then what comes next? Is it Queen Street Posse, or is that?
Oh no, that's way later. It's been a long and winding podcast journey, because I started podcasting with Bob in 2014. He died in January of 2015. And so then I was kind of like on my own, and I still wanted to do the NXT show, but I didn't have a partner. So I had to learn how to edit. I had to learn how to record. I had to learn how to do all the things. And teaching myself Audacity basically was how that happened. So I had some, like, I would bring in guests every once in a while to do NXT shows with me. It wasn't great. A lot of the shows aren't great because I wasn't very good at leading podcasts yet. Like he always kind of led stuff, and I sort of half did because he knew that he had some health problems and whatnot. So he wanted me to be prepared if he had to be in hospital or something. But I sort of did that for a little while. And then I'm trying to remember when I actually started podcasting on a regular schedule again, because Kenny would bring me in if Robert couldn't do something. I would kind of guest star on the main feed or whatever. And then I know by the time July 2016 came around, that was the draft or the brand split again.
Yeah.
When Raw and SmackDown split. And then what was supposed to happen in 2016 was that Kenny and David McCutcheon, who is another person who worked with us, he and Kenny still do occasional content on Patreon. But Kenny and David were supposed to do Raw because they were doing a Raw rundown show anyway. So they were just going to continue doing like a Raw rundown. And then Robert Duffin and I were supposed to do the SmackDown summary. So it was supposed to be like the two pairs of us were kind of like splitting the Inside the Ropes
brand
crew.
versus brand, almost.
Brand versus brand, exactly. But Robert was in the middle of school still, I believe, at that point. He's a teacher now. And he didn't have a lot of time, and like scheduling was really tough. So he and I did one show together and complained about Dolph Ziggler being the number one contender for like a whole episode basically because it was awful. Yeah. And then he couldn't do the next week for whatever reason. So Kenny stepped in, and then he kind of was like, look, guys, I don't have time to do this every week. I can't watch it every week. So then Kenny and I ended up doing SmackDown summary. So Kenny was doing both basically. Like he did Raw and SmackDown. I did SmackDown. Every once in a while, if he was on tour or something, I would fill in with David and do Raw, or David would come on and do SmackDown with me. But it was pretty much Kenny and David did Raw. Kenny and I did SmackDown for a long time. And then I'm trying to remember, we started Retro right around that time too. We started doing our Retro podcast in September of 2016 because we started in 1996 in WWF watching that. So then Kenny and I just kind of became the people who podcast with each other almost every day for a very long time. And it still continues.
Fair enough. Just a question about Queen Street Posse and Kenny before we get onto the journey of Queen Street Posse. How different do you think your chemistry with Jen is to your chemistry with Kenny?
Oh, very different. They're entirely different people. They, yeah, it's hard to really describe because Kenny's more, he's more like businessy, or he's more old school, I guess, in fandom. And Jen is like, when I say that I cry like a baby at wrestling, she's like extra that, you know?
Yeah.
She's like the very other extreme of like being very emotionally invested. And it's not that Kenny doesn't get emotionally invested in it. He does. It's just in a very different way. So I don't know, like it's hard to describe exactly what's different, but it's definitely a very different chemistry. And it's a different type of podcast too, because Jen and I are just kind of doing lighthearted talk about whatever in wrestling comes around. And Kenny and I are more structured, I guess, especially because we do show specific podcasts, because since we cover, you know, on our Patreon, we cover retro content from 20 years ago. So we're watching through Raw and SmackDown from 20 years ago every week. So I'm in what month is it? July right now, as well as in July of 2022. And it's been really interesting. But yeah, like Jen is just, it's a very different dynamic. And I have to do a lot of different things too, because, you know, Twitch versus just audio, like making sure the video stuff goes. And I have a lot more responsibility when it comes to Queen Street Posse, just because I do all the behind the scenes stuff too.
I always forget you guys do it on Twitch, and I do apologize for that.
What? I'm sorry,
I said I always forget you guys do it on Twitch, Queen Street Posse, and I do apologize for that.
That's fine.
So
yeah, we're on Twitch every Wednesday.
Yeah. So how does Queen Street Posse come about then?
That came about because when Inside the Ropes was expanding and starting a website, which I also work for, they were trying to add more podcast content to the brand, basically. So instead of Kenny and me just covering everything, because Kenny is kind of covering a lot with Finn Martin now too, like it's evolved where he does kind of weekly shows with Finn, and they talk about more like the world in WWE, like the modern stuff. So they wanted more female voices to be present, and they knew both of us. Like Jen has worked with Inside the Ropes on the tours for a long time, and I've been podcasting with Inside the Ropes since 2014. So, and Jen and I are friends anyway. Like we've met. It's not like we were out of the blue. It's not like, you know, putting Bob and me together who didn't know each other and got along great. But yeah, we were already friends, and they thought, like, because we are very different fans, like Jen grew up being a fan in the time that I'm covering on retro, and she loves that time period. And I have some fondness for it and some qualms. Like there are certain favorites of hers that are definitely not favorites of mine, which retro listeners can hear. But yeah, they put us together and they said, hey, try a pilot podcast. It was audio at that time. It was before we started on Twitch. And we did a pilot where the two of us just talked. Our chemistry was great. Like, I love talking to her. We have fun. You can tell that we're actually friends. It's not just like for the cameras or anything like that. Like, we're genuine friends. And so, yeah, we started recording every week and kind of doing a show. And the structure of it's evolved a little bit. We tried to cover like Raw and SmackDown specifically and have it more structured for a while. But I think especially as we've moved to Twitch, it's become more freeform, because then we get interaction from the chat too, which is really nice.
How different is your on-camera chemistry with Jen to your off-camera?
It's the same. It's the same. Like, yeah, we're the same. Basically, we're not good enough at acting like we like each other when we don't. Like it's not like we've never bickered or anything like that, right? Like everyone kind of has their stuff.
Yeah.
But it's very rare with the two of us. Like it's very rare that something gets under our skin or whatever. And there's no need to like hide or pretend. Like there are definitely days where one of us will be like, I am exhausted. Let's get through this. Can you please carry it or whatever, you know, like normal stuff. And I have that with Kenny too, where sometimes one of us is just like, look, I am not feeling well or whatever, because I've, you know, podcasted sick. And if I have a voice, I'll pretty much show up. But there have been times where it's just like, it's not great. But yeah, I mean, like Jen and I are good friends. Like when we actually finally got to see each other in Dallas again, after like 4 years of seeing each other, it was great. Like I gave her the biggest hug and we squealed. And
I was like, oh
yeah. No, it was so nice to actually be in the same physical space as her again, because it had been way too long. And no, she's one of my best friends. I love her to bits.
She's a great person. Like, just on a complete side note, I went to the Kurt Angle tour in
How
London.
was it? I'm so
was
jealous.
Dope. But she was taking tickets from like meet and greet ones, and she comes round, and I'm like, because I've interviewed her at this point. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've seen
yeah.
the interview. And she was like, "How are you?" And she was so nice, and like,
Yeah, she's a total sweetheart.
even to my carer, who she didn't know from Adam, she
Uh-huh.
was so nice. And
Oh yeah,
like,
that's Jen. Like she is the nicest person. We're both actually quite shy in our own way, but like if she knows somebody, she really wants to go out of her way to like make people feel welcome and stuff, which is great.
like one thing I will say is, so I bought a meet and greet ticket for myself, and Kenny just said, "Don't worry about a carer's ticket because obviously that's extra money." But Jen went out of her way to ask Kurt to sign something for my carer as well.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, you didn't have to do that, but
yeah.
And I got a picture with her as well. It's on my Twitter as well.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, she's just a total sweetheart. I love it.
Yeah.
Like I love that we get to hang out at least once a week. And the weeks that she has to have off for tours or like I think there's been maybe 1 or 2 weeks that I've had to skip because I was traveling to see family or something. And like those weeks are kind of a bummer. Like I miss her.
Yeah.
Like, I enjoy having my partner fill in. It's fun to have, you know, Ray on the show, but still it's not the same. It's you know, she's my Jan.
Which leads me nicely onto my last little section, which is if one of you wanted to step away, like say something took off for Jen in another direction or yourself vice versa, would you stop Queen Street Posse? Like, do you think it wouldn't work?
I don't think so, but it would have to be a conversation between the two of us. Like, I would never just continue it like without her blessing or anything like that. You know, like if I wanted to stop it and she wanted to keep going, that'd be fine. I don't envision that happening anytime in future, but I mean, I think some version of the show will still exist, but it definitely wouldn't be the same without the two of us because, you know, like we were the inception of it, right? Like she came up with the name Queen Street Posse in like a brainstorming session or whatever when we were trying to think of any pun that wasn't taken. But yeah, I mean, I think I would still be doing something for sure. I don't know if I would call it Queen Street Posse or if it would be something else, but I don't envision that happening in future anytime soon. Like probably eventually, but you know, not soon.
Fair enough. As we look at wrapping this up, we're going to go into a segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my videos before will know this is where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay-per-view, favorite tag team, favorite wrestler or superstar,
and I'm so bad at
theme
these.
song of all time. And these are quick fire. And basically the idea is they're questions that I'm sure Sondra gets asked on social media quite regularly. And now she'll have a place to be like, look, dudes, I've answered this. Please go watch.
Nice.
So what's your favorite match of all time?
Sasha versus Bailey at TakeOver Brooklyn. That one's easy. My favorite match of all time, and it probably always will be.
Why does that match speak to you so much?
Bailey's run in NXT was very special
to me. That is a very silly
fan.
question when I've realized what's behind it.
I mean, like I had my friend paint this for me specifically because I love that Bailey run so much. And plus I love supporting his art, but like, it's, you know, it's one of my favorite paintings he's ever done for me. And that run was just incredible, right? She was the underdog wrestling fan who rose up in the ranks. I mean, when you look at Bailey, who fought AJ Lee in 2013 and like hugged her and didn't want to like do any offense to the main roster divas, to the Bailey who became self-confident and became champion and made the world cry. It was perfect. Like it was a perfect story. It was a perfect match. How it did not get 5 stars is beyond me because it's perfect. Like I can recite that match. Like I've seen it so many times. I know when Sasha's stomping on her hand, I'm going to cry. I know when it gets caught in the stairs, I'm going to cry. When she rolls backwards and can't get the boss face on because, yeah, it's just like a whole thing. I love it.
Right. If we ever do that match on the Rest Watch podcast, you are coming on for a guest appearance. Okay. I'm not going to lie. Favorite pay-per-view of all time?
I don't know if I have one. Pay-per-views are hard because I don't remember what happens a lot. Like, oh, it's really tough. WrestleMania 30 was cool. I liked that one because I like Brian's story was kind of similar to Bailey's, right? Like the underdog who wasn't supposed to make it and made it. So that's the first one that springs to mind. But like, I don't tend to have favorite events like that. Like I'm more apt to rewatch NXT takeovers than I am to watch like main roster pay-per-views.
Oh, NXT takeovers are included in that, by the way.
Yeah, and the thing is, there are so many of them that are so good that it's really hard. Like Unstoppable was incredible with the Sasha and Becky match. I mean, Takeover Brooklyn is great, but like, I don't know if it's my favorite takeover overall because there are some matches on there that are a little bit more forgettable. Takeover Chicago was really, really good, but like I tend to remember the matches and moments more than the shows as a whole, I think.
Fair enough. So we'll skip that one for you. But favorite tag team of all time?
That's really tough too. There are so many good ones. It's probably like between FTR and like, I don't know. I loved FTR from like really early on in NXT. I was a huge fan of them, but I was also a really big American Alpha fan because they were phenomenal. And Cesaro and Tyson Kidd were really, really great too. So I'm probably not going to be able to pick just one, but I would say those are kind of in the rankings of favorite tag teams.
Fair enough. And then favorite theme song of all time?
Favorite theme song is tough too, but probably Edge Metalingus. Like,
is that the one he returned out at the Rumble?
Yeah, like his normal one. The
okay.
You know me. Do that one.
I was like, because I'm not a fan of current Edge, so I'm like, okay.
Oh no, current Edge is terrible, but Edge for a long time was my favorite wrestler because he was the one who got me into it, right? Like beating up a general manager computer, and the Alter Bridge Metalingus was his theme song for years and years and years. It's the one kind of like most synonymous with him. So it's the one that he had before he turned heel and got real boring.
Yeah, fair enough. And then as we wrap this up, favorite superstar or wrestler of all time?
I'm leaning toward Bryan Danielson right now. I mean, Ophidian the Cobra is one of my favorite wrestlers. He was in Chikara primarily and worked for some other promotions. So I would say him, but he's retired. So I don't know. I think probably it's becoming Bryan Danielson because I think over time, like, because for a while it would have been Edge and then it would have been Bray Wyatt. Bray Wyatt for many years was my favorite, but I think it's got to be between Ophidian and Bryan Danielson.
Fair enough. Speaking of Bryan Danielson, before we wrap this up, I have to ask you, is that the hemp belt behind you?
Yeah, it is.
Is it?
Yeah.
That is really cool.
Thank you.
So
I got it for Christmas.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah,
so,
my partner gave that to me.
Oh, cool. So as we wrap this up, the question I end all my interviews on is with YouTube, with podcasting, with social media in general, we're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of way. So what is one piece of content that you want the good people to check out to know your body of work? And then what is one that you're like, don't go back and look at that. I've grown a lot since then.
Thankfully, a lot of the old stuff that I don't like is not, to my knowledge, available. Like some of the bad like NXT shows and stuff, I don't think exist right now. I mean, I have them, but there is also one WrestleMania podcast that I was so like anti WrestleMania 31 that Robert and Kenny had to re-record it because it was so much of a bummer. So yeah, and it doesn't exist. It never got put out anywhere, but I have the recording. That might be a Patreon bonus at some point if I find it again. It's on an old computer, but I'm trying to think in terms of like checking out my work. I don't know if there's any specific podcast. That first SmackDown summary with Robert was one of my favorite episodes that I've ever done. That one is very fun. I think that one might still exist on the internet somewhere. If not, it'll come up on Patreon on the classic stuff. But I think that one, it'd be July 2016 on the Inside the Ropes feed, if that's still out there. But like as far as current stuff, just check me out on Twitch every Wednesday because I'm there with Jen, and it's fun because you can like, watch along and chat with us and get involved in the show and that sort of thing. We are really appreciative of, we have some regulars who always kind of join us on Twitch and support the show with both time and money, which is much appreciated. But yeah, I would say just check that out. And then any of the Patreon stuff, if you can even try it out for a month, it's not like a commitment that you have to keep doing. But if you want access to all of the content and sign up for a month just to try it out, you can always like download a backlog of it. And if you like it, then continue because that helps keep us do what we're doing. because
Fair
that's how we
enough.
stay. That's how we're able to justify this crazy job that we have.
Fair enough. Normally, I'd ask people as we wrap this up, where can the good people find you? But it sounds like you covered a lot of that just in
Yeah.
that.
Twitch.tv/Inside the Ropes is where you can find Queen Street Posse every Wednesday at 9 p.m. UK/3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern. And I am on Twitter at Sondra Ruth ITR. I'm on Instagram at Sondra Ruth. You can follow Queen Street Posse at Queen Street Posse on both Twitter and Instagram. Patreon.com/Inside the Ropes is where you can find Kenny and me doing retro content, as well as the AEW rundown every week. We talk about AEW. Subscribe to Inside the Ropes magazine. You can see some of them behind me. I write for the magazine every month. I am very proud of my work there. It is difficult when I used to freak out about writing my articles all the time, but I'm getting better at it, I think, and like able to manage my time a little bit more. And check out itrwrestling.com as well. That's a great place to get all of your wrestling news, and I work for them. So those are all the places, I think.
It's well worth doing, guys. If you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talks Rubbish. Follow bodyslam.net on Twitter and YouTube for my show with Cassidy Haynes, the Wrestle Watch podcast. And follow the Wrestle Watch podcast on Twitter to help us pick a match to watch every week. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.